Welcome back to Conscious Caregiving with L&L. I am your co-host, Lance a.slatton. As always, joined by my esteemed colleague and friend, Lori La Bey, the founder of Alzheimer Speaks, co-founder of Dementia Map, the author of Betty the Bald Chicken, and the co-host here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L. Welcome, Lori.
Well, hello, Lance. It's been a while, so I'm excited to have this conversation today. I always like chatting with you about what's going on and trying to give people some tips and tricks to survive the world of senior care.
Yes, and they need those survival tips, that's for sure. I think today we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of having your legal paperwork documented and up to date. And there's countless reasons for that. One for me is always to make sure, as far as healthcare goes, that your wishes are honored and respected and ultimately enforced if you can't advocate and enforce them yourselves. But then there's also the financial aspect of it too. As we age, we encounter health issues, or it could be when we're younger, a car accident, or just any number of things. But the real reason for that is, families sometimes are a mixed blend family where you have stepchildren, or maybe you have an estranged child, or any number of factors. And for the surviving family, it makes life a lot easier for them. It avoids probate court. It also, again, makes sure that the wishes and, the estate is divided and contributed to the people that it was intended for. And so we we decided that would be a good topic for this month. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, and I just want to give a caveat that neither of us are attorneys. So, this
Good
is
point.
just what we hear and have personally experienced ourselves. And, I'm a firm believer that everybody, and we should be teaching this in school, actually, when people turn 18, they should have powers of attorney and healthcare directives. Maybe not a will, because most people don't have, things at that time. But I think at least the power of attorney and the healthcare directives are really, really critical. You mentioned about families. We have a few nuclear families, but a lot of them are mixed or blended. Some are legally, married, others are not, so I mean, there's so many variables out there. And yet I find many are not having this conversation.
Right.
And it is absolutely critical. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they are a blended family. They're married. Their children are all older. Husband passed, wife is still with us. And, she's going in to kind of get her affairs in order and kind of figuring out her husband's. And the attorney asked, because you didn't have a will, what were the wishes for the two of you? Let's say if you got a car accident, both died.
Right.
And she said, well, we never talked about that, because assets typically will transfer from one spouse to another. And does that mean then they all go one way and then the other side gets nothing? I mean, that's a pretty big oops, we forgot about that. And how do we decide that? So in this particular situation, the thing is to put a will together, and she's going to try to incorporate that into her, last will and testament. But she could say, no, I just want it to go to my kids, and then his kids would get nothing, and she would be of legal right to do that. So I just think it is so important. And there's so many ways, I think, to be able to avoid things too, in terms of costs. I think you have to interview um, attorneys
Yeah.
and find out who kind of fills your soul and feels like a match. And
Right.
I'll use my personal experience on this one. I knew exactly who I was going to use, somebody very prominent in our area. They do a lot of education. They're very well known. They've got a great reputation. And when I was helping somebody else, I hesitated. And then I interviewed a couple others. And then I thought, this person came highly recommended. And they'll even do things kind of a la carte, because he was really honest. And he said, it doesn't need to be this expensive. And you don't hear that very often from an attorney. And he's like, I can guide you. You can consult with me and I can have you process paperwork. Or I can do the whole thing, but I want to give people that option. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And I was still kind of pulling stuff together. And then I started beating myself up because I'm like, why am I not acting? It's been 2 months. I should have pulled the trigger. I should be on the road with this and going. And then all of a sudden popped up a referral from two friends who have used this other attorney multiple times. I was on the phone 5 minutes with her, and it was like, this is my person.
Mm.
Because she wasn't talking all attorney talk. Everybody has their jargon and all of that stuff. She was very down to earth, very personal, wanted to know about the people and their situation, much more than just the assets. And for me, that aligned with me. And so met with her, and it was like night and day, just a night and day experience. So I think it's really important for people to do their homework because, and I used to say this when I was in real estate all the time, just because your aunt loved a real estate agent doesn't mean they're going to work well for you.
Right.
You have different needs, you have different personality styles, different goals for what it is. So you really need to take to heart who it is you're working with, and do you feel comfortable with them?
Yeah.
Do you trust them? I think that's critically important. And maybe you have other thoughts on that.
Well, no, I fully agree with you. It's kind of, two examples I want to make and correlate to the real estate agent working for one, not the other. It's kind of like with dementia. You've seen one person with dementia. You've seen one person. It can entirely, dramatically affect your loved one differently. But, with our company and myself, we get asked for referrals all the time. And we rarely ever give a referral. And people kind of look at us and we say, no, it's not you. It's the fact that we'll use a restaurant as an analogy. I can say, you know what, that restaurant was phenomenal. It's the best food ever. And you and your family or you and whoever, you go there and you have a terrible experience. You're going to take that experience and it's going to be a reflection of our referral. Just because we had a good experience or we enjoyed the food, maybe you go and it's a bad night or an off night for your waiter, or the kitchen was short staffed, so the food's not as good. So you really have to do your own homework. You can get recommendations and look into them and see if it is the right fit for you. And, another thing you mentioned that I really agree with, Lori, is, starting at 18, getting your stuff in order. And people probably, I myself, and I'm going to give an example of myself, probably say, oh, 18-year-old, what could they have? But, at 18, you can vote, you can do a lot of things, join the military, and you need to know what your wishes are in case something happens. You need to have a voice now as an 18-year-old. And so, and I may have told you this story before, Lori, and I've shared it on the show several times. When I was taking a hospice and palliative care course, one of our assignments was to pick up the book 5 Wishes. And so didn't really know what it was, went to the bookstore, purchased it. I think it was like $1.99 or something. And it's really your 5 wishes for how and the way you want to be treated in the event you can't advocate for yourself. Nothing to do with finances, nothing like that, but it's just health related. It is recognized, I think, in 48 of the 50 states. You don't need a lawyer. And you can just simply fill it out, have a conversation with who you trust and would be your advocate in the event you can't. They'll sign it and date it. But at that time, I didn't realize the significance of it, right? I mean, I was fairly intelligent. I was probably 22 or so at the time. And I'm thinking, man, why is he making us do this doom and gloom stuff? But now professionally, I've seen 17, 18, 19, 20 somethings, 30 somethings who probably would have felt and thought the same thing had it. They then go out and they get into a car accident and they have a traumatic brain injury. They're in a coma, or they have any number of things happen to them, but the family doesn't know what their wishes were. They don't know what they wanted. And so now the family's left guessing, and they're going to always guess in the best interest of their loved one, but it still doesn't replace the exact wishes of that loved one. And so I don't think it's ever too early to have that conversation. I was talking to a family the other day and they don't want to talk to their mom and dad who are in their 80s about their wishes. And I said, you don't have to make it about, death and dying. You can make it a beautiful thing. Or if you're more comfortable, make up that, hey, I got a friend situation. Mom, I have a friend whose mom was just diagnosed with this or that. And she said her mom wanted to have everything done or didn't want to have anything done. What do you think about that? So you're kind of indirectly incorporating that into the conversation without just calling her out directly, and I think that's important.
So, one of the things that people could do is do it as a family. We did that actually with my folks, because my folks said, "Oh, we don't have much for a will," then they were kind of surprised when they found out. But my dad was just, no, we don't need that. And so Tom and I, we did ours at the same time to make them feel more comfortable. But I've also had it like with the healthcare directives with a couple of personal friends where their kids were either in a car accident or got, really ill and were in the hospital. And they were the ones still paying their insurance because they were in college. And the doctors would not release any information to them because they weren't assigned authority.
Right.
And that was just horrible. They could visit, but they didn't really know what was going on or couldn't help make choices. And is that really how you want to be cared for? To have, and I would say, just from recent experiences with family members in the hospital, you don't want that because it is so inconsistent. It is not even funny.
Yeah.
It is so inconsistent. Even when you're communicating with them, things aren't happening the way you requested when you have the authority. I mean, you have to be a Hawkeye. So I think it's really important to, not look at this as, oh gosh, if I do this, I'm going to die.
Right.
It's about just living well and having honest conversations, because none of us know when we're going to get sick. One of the things that I liked that this attorney the other day said too, she said, honestly, she says, as we age, especially, as we're older adults, our health status typically isn't going to improve.
Right.
And that's critically important to be realistic about that, because how many people do you know who have had a heart attack or a stroke?
Right.
It just, boom, everything changes in a day. Or like you said, a car accident, boom. We don't know. This isn't something we plan for and sign up, go, yeah, I'm ready to be sick right now. Or, yeah, give me that car accident. That's not how life works. It just happens. And so to be prepared is really a wise thing to be able to do, I think.
No, I fully agree. I kind of make an analogy sometimes to families about auto insurance. Nobody thinks they're going to get into an accident, but you still have auto insurance. Taking out, the obvious caveat that it's required to drive a vehicle, you have auto insurance, even though the odds of getting into an auto accident are very minimal for most people, but we still have it. That's the same with having your wishes documented and having this paperwork taken in place. The odds of something happening prematurely are minimal, but it's still there in the event that something does happen, and you're just protecting yourself. And I also, really stress to families, it isn't just about living and dying, right? When you get these wishes created, and I always recommend, going to an attorney that specializes in like elder care law or family law, that knows the options available and the verbiage, because, there's something about, artificial nutrition. Some people don't want to have a feeding tube indefinitely to survive or live on, but there are situations where either, being put on a respirator or having, artificial tube feeding, you can say, yes, I would like that. In the event my doctors agree that there's a higher probability of me no longer requiring it after a certain amount of time. But if they feel it would be required indefinitely, I don't want it. So, these are like tools and, support services that can help you in the interim for a short period of time, but it doesn't mean you're going to need it or require it indefinitely. And I think that's a big difference that families don't typically understand or know. They think it's an all or nothing kind of situation. There's a family we had helped not too long ago, and the person was on a ventilator, and the ventilator was only needed for, I think it was like 4 or 5 weeks. It wasn't something that was going to be required long term. And in his wishes, he did have it documented that he would be acceptable to artificial ventilation if it was a short term solution for a long term fix. And that was wonderful. But I look at it like if that person had thought it was all or nothing and they put, no, I don't want a ventilator, then this person probably would not have lived. And since he did know better, or his attorney, I'm assuming, said you can have it as a short term solution, and he chose to have that option available, he was, I don't want to say cured, but he improved to the point where he's now off it. He's eating, drinking, talking, and breathing on his own. So, I mean, these are big decisions, but they're not complicated if you have the right person supporting you while you're making them.
Well, and bottom line is we don't know what all those options are,
Right.
and so it's important to be able to talk through that. There is an organization called Compassion in Choices. And one of the things that I like that they've done is they have what's it called? Dementia Values and Priorities tab. And it's a tool that says, if I have this, this, and this, what level of care do I want? How bad do I still want to live? And then there's like 5 different choices. And then it's like, if I have this mixture, and because a lot of times we're looking at one-offs, and the one-offs don't really matter. But if you stick them all together, like now I can't speak and I'm bedridden and I don't have control over my bodily functions, and I can't communicate, that might make a difference versus I'm just incontinent or I'm just bedridden. And I don't want to say just, as it's minimal, but those types of things are really important to consider. And I liked how they kind of packaged that.
Right.
And the other thing to remember is this can be changed. You can get these forms free, and you can do them yourself, or you can go through a guided process. Maybe do that the first time if you want to, if you don't want to, spend the money to do it again. But then you would kind of know at least what some of those options are. There's lots of videos and books out there and organizations that can kind of help you with that as well. But I think the more we get the public conversation going, the better off we are. I did a couple of these with family members, and the husband said, "Oh, yeah, I can do that. Oh no, she's not going to be able to do that. She's got dementia." And I said, "Well, I think we should try." I had a much better conversation, a way more in-depth conversation with her
Yeah.
than I did him,
Yeah.
because he was afraid to talk about it.
Right.
And she really knew, she had given it some thought, and it was really important. And she was so thankful that somebody talked to her about these things. And so I think sometimes our prejudgment comes in of who's capable to have these conversations or not. And even if you just get tidbits of what people's wishes are, I think is important, because when it comes time for someone to pass, you're sitting down, or even before, when you're in the hospital trying to make these decisions. And then once they pass, it's like, do they want to be cremated? Do they want a celebration of life? Do they want an obit in the paper? I mean, those are things we don't talk about, but they're big decisions when you're honoring somebody's life.
Right.
And it gives you an opportunity to even write part of your own obit if you want to. You can state who you want to be notified or in attendance, or who you don't. Because some families and some relationships, aren't the best, and it's like, no, I don't want that person, at my service. So there's all kinds of little pieces that are involved in that I think are important conversations. And then typically when one person is filling these out, there's a conversation. And if you do it as a group, I think you're just all going to gain so much knowledge, because we all have different questions and different opinions. And we might have it in our mind that, no, I don't want that. And then after hearing why somebody else wants it, it's like, oh, that really does make sense. I never looked at it like that. So and I haven't seen this. I don't know if you have, but Have you seen where people do like any like group classes on this where the conversations kind of come out from the group?
I know, well, not, I haven't seen it per se like that, but I have seen where some of our colleges around here and even hospitals, they will have like, long-term care planning meeting or conferences, seminars where they are talking about, what to expect, what documents you'll need, the importance and what this means and what that means. Because, the hospital and like even with our staff, we tell the families, we'll say one of the first questions we say, is your loved one a DNR? Do not resuscitate. And they'll say, I think so. Yeah, probably. And we say, well, there's not a yes, think so. You will actually have a document saying they are a DNR. I said, because without that document, if there's an emergency when our staff is in the home or they go to the hospital, CPR is being administered or all advanced life support is being, executed because that's a responsibility and duty of the healthcare profession. But if you have it documented, then they're going to make sure that those wishes are enforced. So we always tell the families, we need a copy of your POA paperwork, your advance directives or living will, and we keep it right in the binders for our staff, and we keep a copy here at the office because we have families, Lori, we're with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there are no other family members around. And so, the onus is now on us to make sure that these wishes are enforced and respected.
Well, that do not resuscitate is really interesting because I never really thought of it in this way, but I remember bringing a relative into the doctor, and the doctor brought it up, and I said, "Yeah, we're discussing this, and we've done one." And
Right.
he said, he's like, "I don't know what your answer is, and I don't even want to know what it is right now, but I want you to be really clear what happens when those compressions on the chest happen."
And it's not pleasant.
And he said many people end up with many, many broken ribs. And I mean, one cracked rib hurts, one twisted rib hurts, but actually broken. And he said that's not uncommon, especially as we age and our bones get more frail. So he said to Tom, I need you to really understand that when you make your decision, because yes, it might save your life, but are your bones going to heal?
Mm.
Because a lot of times that's a very difficult thing and they don't do much anymore. And maybe it's different when there's that kind of damage that's done. But I know, and I'll say actually for Tom, who I brought in, he had a couple of falls and he broke a couple ribs. They don't wrap them anymore. They don't do really anything with them anymore. They
A
just,
broken toe.
yeah, yeah, they just kind of let it heal. And I know I'm 66. I don't heal as fast as I used to. I mean, I don't care if luckily I haven't broken anything, but if it's a twisted ankle or if it's a cut, it's like, what's going on? That should have been gone in 3 days for sure, and I'm 2 weeks out and it's still there, not as severe, but it's just like, that's a huge change. My body's not healing as fast as it used to. And that was something I never really thought of. So, when I asked you about the classes, I've seen where people come and talk at people.
Mm.
But I think it would be really nice to have a class where there's a professional guiding people, but there's actually classroom discussion of what does that mean to you and how do you see that apply in your life. I think that would be really educational.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you just gave me a great idea for a future conscious caregiving episode. Maybe we need to get an elder law attorney in and just talk about the different options and paperwork, just so people have the full exact, specific details. Because like you said, neither one of us are attorneys, but we're just speaking as lay people. But people need to know about this regardless, whether they hear it from a friend or, maybe they're getting their hair done and their, beautician is talking about how she just had to have the paperwork done for her father-in-law or, something like that. The bottom line is we all want to make sure that people's wishes are enforced and that they're executed properly. And, without it, it's you're just guessing. And, I know earlier, Lori, I alluded to like the healthcare side of it. briefly on the estate side, as you know, you and I both know well, that can lead to a lot more drawn out issues through the court system, through probate court, and can cause a lot of infighting between families. And I'll just share one quick example of a family I know of that this happened to recently. And we were helping them. The dad passed away, and we had encouraged, you know, the family, get this paperwork done, get this paperwork done. And they had several siblings. I think they had seven, and five of the seven, you know, were quote unquote, you know, good kids and, you know, there for their parents. And they had two estranged siblings. And those siblings that were estranged for, you know, almost their entire adult life, they came out of the woodwork when dad passed, and they were looking to see what their inheritance was. And dad wanted the five to get everything. And, you know, because that relationship had been severed, you know, 40, 50 years ago. And that was like the last communication. But as soon as they found out their father had passed, they came back into the fold. And because dad didn't have anything documented, the entire estate was divided 7 equal ways rather than 5 equal ways. And I'm not judging whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying, you know, if families want to avoid situations like that or get things tied up in probate court, which is going to cost the family significant amount of money, time, emotional stress, everything else, again, have that conversation with your loved ones to make sure everything is the way they want it to be.
Yeah, well, and it's again making sure your wishes are taken seriously, and because the court has to fall back on what the laws are. And every state is twisted a little bit different in terms of how they perceive things and stuff. And so, one of the things that happens a lot is people get married, maybe it's second marriage, and and I mean, and I've seen this as a real estate agent of 25 years. Nobody asks, how do you want to take title?
Yeah.
Everyone just assumes, like, if you die, you want it to go to them. That's not necessarily true. Some people want their portion to go to their kids.
Mhm.
That complicates things too. Others will have an insurance policy to buy out the spouse, and then the kids can get their portion, and then no one's left with less, or an insurance policy, for the kids, and then the wife or the husband get the whole house, so things aren't disrupted. There's so many twists and turns of how to be able to do this. It really is very, very interesting. Um, let's switch over to talk a little bit about the power of attorney, because typically the first thing out of everyone's mouth is, I don't want anybody knowing my business. I don't want them taking my money. I don't want them making decisions on that. What do you say to that?
Well, for me, it goes back to making sure your wishes are being executed. The power of attorney, I'm going to speak to the healthcare part first. They're there to act on your behalf, and they're
Mhm.
not there to make decisions separate from your wishes. They're there to make sure that your wishes are enforced when you're not able to enforce them. So they have the power of you when you don't have that ability. And again, you want to have that conversation with that family member, that friend, or whoever it is. Some people pick an attorney to be their power of attorney. You're going to pay for it, but some people don't have that family member that's able or willing. And this is vitally important. And they often end up having to work hand in hand with the power of attorney over finances. It's always advisable to have two separate people. They kind of work as a check and balance, one over your finances, one over your healthcare. But again, there's going to be a lot of overlap, right? You might have to call that sister, that brother. Mom has, a $1,200, MRI test insurance isn't covering. You got to sign off on it. Again, it goes back to usually when you get your POAs, your power of attorneys, you've had your advance directives or your living will, or your will in general already put together and executed. And then in that paperwork is where you assign those individuals, and there will usually be an alternate. So, Lori, I'm going to pick you to be my power of attorney. You agree. I give you a copy of what my wishes are, how I want things done. You say, okay, I will enforce it. Lori, you become sick, or your life circumstance change and you can no longer do that. I'm going to have an alternate listed. So I might pick, Mary or Susie or whoever it is to be the backup, and then they'll have a copy as well. But again, it's very advisable because let's say you go to the hospital because you had a concussion or you had a stroke, you can't advocate for yourself, right? So you got to have that power of attorney that can say, no, my friend, my dad, my wife, my husband, they wanted everything possibly done within your means to, sustain their life. Or maybe it's the opposite. They don't want to be on a ventilator unless there's a chance of a meaningful recovery to come off of it, or they don't want to be on it because it's going to be indefinitely. That's where all those different options and choices come in that family members have to sit down and talk about and make.
Yeah, that's very true. And you can always, kick somebody off for being that power of attorney.
Absolutely. You can
You can
revoke it.
you can pull that. You have to notify them, and then you have to notify everyone else who had a copy, of that. So that might be, your banks or finances and your doctor. Those types of things are all gonna, need to know that that has changed.
Can I give a quick example before we wrap up?
Sure.
So a real good friend of mine is an attorney, and we had a conversation one day, and he was all distraught. He got hired by this woman's daughter. The daughter was not a power of attorney over finances. Her sister was the executor and the power of attorney over finances. So mom had her added to the bank accounts, had her added to the checks. So it said the mom's name and her sister's name on the checks. First year or so, sister would give the siblings all an updated accounting of the finances to keep everybody on the same page so they knew where money was going. And then the following year, that kind of slowly became less regular. And end result is mom passed away. So when it was time to divide the inheritance and execute the estate, they found out there was no money left. And so this sister was just livid, and I said, it's righteous. She should be upset. The sister was going on shopping trips, buying cars, doing vacations, just the whole 9 yards. Mom had advanced dementia. Mom didn't know any different. She just made sure mom's little rent was covered off the top, and that was about it. And so she was suing her sister and said she stole our inheritance, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason my friend, the attorney who was trying to help this woman, was so distraught and really just upset is because he had no legal recourse to go after this lady because her name was on everything. So was in the court's eyes, right or wrong, in the court's eyes legally, she had every right to spend that money as if it was her own. So my point in sharing that story is, regardless of who you pick, make sure you have a very good, trusting relationship with that person. And I'm sure this woman trusted her daughter. But the problem was when the siblings were holding her to account to give them updates and share information, she stopped. That's when they should have acted, is at that point. But they didn't because, again, they were trusting their sister. Those kind of things can happen. So, just for people to be aware of it, once you add people to those bank accounts and checking and credit cards, that money is as much theirs as it is yours.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can put like, beneficiaries on account. So she could have listed all the kids at time of death where this is going and have a separate power of attorney, to be able to work on their behalf, because I think that would have made a difference if it would have been that situation versus that joint ownership. And, it can happen, somebody can all of a sudden get addicted. They can be having financial problems. I mean, lots of little things.
They lose their job. They lose their
Yep.
job.
Yep. And they're just going to take a little and they're going to pay it back. And then it just doesn't happen. And pretty soon it's all gone. And so, so it can be innocent or it can be very blatant, but either way, it's not upholding the person's wishes, and it rips the family apart and can be extremely devastating, to everybody in that situation. So yeah, getting guidance on how to set that up is absolutely critical to do because we don't always know what's
Right.
best
Absolutely.
with all of that stuff. And you can, on a power of attorney, too, say that they can't transfer funds to themselves. But that might be just transferring, taking money out of an account, putting it into another one. Maybe that doesn't cover purchasing stuff
Right.
for them. You
Right.
know, if that was checked, maybe there would have been an inkling of safety there. But again, when they are joint on the account, or if they get sued,
Yeah.
and they're on that account, now there's a liability
Yep.
against those funds.
Yep.
So that makes a difference too.
Yeah, and that's why for me, I always recommend, there are things like, online sites you can purchase the documents pre-templated and fill them out. Some of these sites now offer a concierge service as an additional fee where you buy their templates, you fill them out, and then if you have questions, they will offer you, 24-hour legal support, which I think is nice. You do pay for that. I'm kind of old school just because when you're talking about estates and homes and assets, it's not that expensive for an attorney to do it.
Yeah.
I think around here it's a few $100s. That's it. Plus, they will have copies of it readily available. They can send it out to who you need it to go out to. But again, if people are comfortable, you can go online for maybe just $100 or so, and get the templates. But things like you're talking about and I'm sharing, those are things that, an attorney can advise you on and guide you in the right direction, just so you are protected and your loved ones protected as much as possible.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, hopefully these little tidbits will help somebody out there. And like you said, maybe we'll do another show a little bit more in depth on each of these categories because we went into the will just barely,
Right.
in terms of what's included there or trust. And then, we kind of focus more on the power of attorney and the healthcare directives. But they're just very critical pieces.
Absolutely. Always good to see you, though, Lori.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank our audience for listening as well.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Bye bye.
Thank you for joining us again here this month at Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.